Hey everyone, welcome to a special installment of Harry Potter Theory. We're now well into 2025, and I wanted to take this opportunity to take a look back at 2024 and highlight 5 of my favourite dark Harry Potter theories from the year. There's a good variety here, so hopefully you enjoy. Let's get into it. At the time of writing this, Ollivander's wand shop has been supplying the wizarding community with the finest wands money can buy for nearly 24 centuries, having first opened its doors as far back as 382 BC. I know, this date does seem a little far-fetched, but rest assured that it has been confirmed as canon. And it was during that year that the original Ollivander, the ancestor of Garrick Ollivander, was thought to have come from a Mediterranean country in Roman times and set up a stall in what would eventually become Diagon Alley. The Ollivander family quickly revolutionized wand-making when they publicly forsook the traditional wand-making process, which previously had witches and wizards procure their own wand core. Ollivander believed that this process produced wands that were inferior in quality and performance, which led to the family procuring all wand components for future customers. At this point, the Ollivander of the time began his quest to discover the finest wand cores and the wand woods that best complemented them. And from this point onward, the purchaser would no longer select a wand of their choosing, and instead began the tradition of the wand choosing the wizard. In theory, this is a nice idea which ensures that each witch or wizard is paired with a wand perfect just for them. It also portrays the Ollivander family as genuinely caring for their customers' best interests in the name of passionate wand making. But I think there's a lot more to this business model than meets the eye. And I think that I've got some compelling evidence to suggest that there are some seriously dark undertones to the wand industry. Join me today as we dismantle the single longest running business in wizarding history. Let's dive in. Hey everyone, welcome to another installment of Harry Potter Theory. Before the original Ollivander came along, the wand-making process was, by modern-day standards, a little antiquated. Customers would bring all manners of ingredients to wand makers to be woven into their wand and used as their wand core, and the possibilities were seemingly endless. But this is where the Ollivander family really disrupted the market and set themselves apart from other wand makers, introducing a process whereby the witch or wizard would be selected from a number of wands that were already made. This was a revolution in the wand-making world, and it made a huge difference in the efficacy of wands in general. However, things still weren't quite up to the modern standard. You see, the materials still weren't quite right. Early in my career, as I watched my wand maker father wrestling with substandard wand core materials such as kelpie hair, I conceived the ambition to discover the finest cores and to work only with those when my time came to take over the family business. This I have done. After much experimentation and research, I concluded that only 3 substances produce wands of the quality to which I am happy to give the illustrious name of Ollivander: unicorn hair, dragon heartstring, and phoenix feather. Each of these costly and rare materials has its own distinct properties. In this quote from the most recent Ollivander, Garrick, he explains that he only utilizes 3 primary wand cores: phoenix, unicorn, and dragon. Though Ollivander is fully aware of the presence of other available wand core materials, he instead opts to stick with dragon, phoenix, and unicorn because they are, allegedly, the most reliable, and allow him to consistently make powerful wands. At the surface level, it's hard to question Ollivander's approach. He comes from a long line of wand makers, he is the expert in his field, and his family have supplied the wizarding world with honest and reliable wands for thousands of years. And it stands to reason that the most powerful and rarest creatures would provide the most powerful ingredients with which to create wands. I mean, why not? But here's the thing. I think that Ollivander has an ulterior motive. In his statements, Ollivander gives us the impression that he chooses these select few materials because he is motivated by creating the most powerful wands. But I think that Mr. Ollivander has another thing on his mind: money. Ollivander's ancestors may have revolutionized the wand-making process when they introduced the idea of the wand choosing the wizard, but they also distinctly changed the wand purchasing process. Where previously a witch or wizard could save a few galleons by bringing in their own materials, this option was no longer on the table, and the customer was instead forced to purchase an all-in-one solution. Nobody batted an eyelid at this because at the end of the day, Ollivanders did produce impressive wands. But this did generate more revenue for the Ollivander family. They had employed the perfect marketing strategy. Because so many witches and wizards received a good product over the centuries, this business model functioned exactly as intended. However, when it was Garrick Ollivander's turn to take over the family business, he set his sights much higher. He wanted to take the family business to the next level, which is why Ollivander implemented the 3-core system, whereby customers were forced to purchase wands constructed from core materials extracted from the rarest and most powerful creatures. This system, in turn, allowed Ollivander to charge even more for the ones that he sold in his shop. There were no longer any cheap options. It was dragon, unicorn, phoenix, or the door. And that's why it became harder in recent times for wizarding families to afford wands for all of their children. Case in point, Ron Weasley. Prior to the introduction of this system, there were many other wand cores available from a variety of wand makers. These include Vela, Basilisk, Wampus Cat, Thunderbird, Snallygaster, Jackalope, Rugaru, Thestral, Troll, Dittany, Horned Serpent, White River Monster, Bone, Shell, Coral, Kurupira, and of course Kelpie. But that's just the tip of the iceberg, and I find it hard to believe that beyond his selected 3, no other wand core is worthy of the Ollivander name. But here's where the theory gets a bit darker. Narrowing down his wand cores to the rarest and most powerful 3 introduced a new problem: sourcing ingredients. After all, it's not as though there are tons of dragons, unicorns, and phoenixes running around offering up their body parts. Many wand cores are derived from parts of animals that are regenerative and/or cause no harm. But with some of the more extreme ingredients like dragon heartstring, it's reasonable to assume that this object is taken from a dead dragon, since the heart is a vital organ and relies on it. Phoenix feathers and unicorn hair are not nearly as extreme, but are still exceedingly hard to come by. And this becomes increasingly concerning when we consider the quantities at which Ollivander would need to procure these ingredients. Just how many dragon heartstrings, unicorn hairs, and phoenix feathers is Ollivander hoarding? And this of course raises the question of how on earth he gets all of these ingredients. Take a seat, because it's about to get a lot less innocent, folks. Theory 1. His Hogwarts connection. When it comes to procuring unusual ingredients and bits of rare creatures, there's only one man, or rather half-giant, that comes to my mind: Rubeus Hagrid. Throughout the books, Hagrid consistently demonstrates an uncanny ability to acquire and handle rare and illegal magical creatures. Because of this, many have begun to speculate that Hagrid may be secretly wealthy from his involvement in the black market trade of magical creatures and materials. Dragon eggs? Hagrid's got them. 3-headed dogs? No problem. The fact that Hagrid is able to consistently acquire new and illegal creatures could be an indicator that he has black market connections. There's also the fact that he's somehow able to purchase these creatures. Therefore, it stands to reason that Hagrid would be the perfect connection to supply Ollivander with phoenix feathers, unicorn hairs, and dragon heartstrings. Before you go into a full-blown meltdown, hear me out, because I've got some pretty compelling evidence. One of the biggest clues comes from a passage in the books where it's mentioned that Hagrid had a whole skein of unicorn hairs just laying around. He was looking up at the ceiling, from which a number of brass pots hung, and also a long, silky skein of bright white hair. "That's never unicorn hair, Hagrid." "Oh yeah," said Hagrid indifferently. "Gets pulled out of their tails. They catch it on branches and stuff in the forest, you know. But my dear chap, do you know how much that's worth? I use it for binding and bandages and stuff if a creature gets injured," said Hagrid, shrugging. "It's dead useful, very strong, see?" But I think Hagrid does indeed know its value, and that his indifferent attitude in this exchange may have just been his attempt at brushing the subject aside in the hopes that no further attention would be placed on it. I think that skein of unicorn hair was getting prepared to be delivered to Ollivander's. There's also the questionable moment where Hagrid has dragon meat in his hut. "You're not going to eat that, are you, Hagrid? It looks poisonous." "It's supposed to look like that. It's dragon meat. And I didn't get it to eat." "That's better. It helps with the stinging, you know." Pair all of this with the fact that Hagrid spends an unusual amount of time with dubious characters in Knockturn Alley, and I think we've got something worth considering. Theory 2. Charlie Weasley. While Hagrid is likely quite a good source for procuring phoenix feathers and unicorn hairs, I suspect that dragon heartstrings would be a little harder for him to come by. So now the question is, who do we know from the Harry Potter books that has direct access to dragons? Why, Charlie Weasley, of course. While I would never accuse Charlie, a dragon conservationist, of harmful or exploitative practices, I do think that it's possible that he may have harvested the heartstrings of dragons that died by natural means. This would explain how someone like Ollivander could consistently acquire such rare materials without engaging in illegal or unethical practices himself. Charlie's involvement would also ensure that the supply was both controlled and of the highest quality, contributing to Ollivander's reputation for crafting some of the finest ones. Given Charlie's character and his passion for dragon conservation, I suspect that he may have justified the exchange by believing that the dragon heartstrings would go to a good cause, helping witches and wizards through their wands. In return, Charlie could have received financial support for his work, or even protection for the dragons under his care, ensuring their safety from poachers and other threats. This would allow him to balance his love for dragons with the practical need for funding to continue his work. After all, dragon poaching is quite a big problem in different parts of the wizarding world. The Romanian longhorn, for example, has a dwindling population, largely due to the value of their horns. This has made them a common target for poachers. This also happens to be a dragon native to the country where Charlie works. The horns of this breed of dragon are highly valued as potion ingredients, and as a result, its numbers have fallen in recent years. Perhaps sourcing heartstrings from already deceased dragons and selling them to Ollivander allows Charlie to reinvest this money into his dragon conservation efforts, ultimately doing more good than harm. There's also the possibility that Ollivander simply sources his materials from unknown black market dealers or poachers. Considering the centuries-old legacy of the Ollivander family business, it's plausible to assume that they may have developed covert relationships with less reputable individuals to ensure a steady supply of rare, magical ingredients. But however Ollivander may source his ingredients, one thing is certain: the wizarding world turns a blind eye. The Ollivander family has an impeccable reputation which has been synonymous with excellence in wand-making for centuries, and I suspect that their craftsmanship is so revered that people are willing to overlook, or perhaps remain willfully ignorant of, the methods behind it. In this way, the Ollivanders have woven themselves into the fabric of the magical community, becoming nearly untouchable. The wizarding world knows that without Ollivander's wands, the magical community would be far less capable and far less powerful.
Voldemort's conception was unusual, to say the least, and it was the loveless union between his parents that set in motion his path of psychopathy. With a mother that chose death over her infant child, and a father that abandoned the both of them, it's fair to say that Voldemort never stood much of a chance. But what if Voldemort's origin story isn't exactly what we thought it was? What if Merrippy Gaunt, accused of giving Voldemort's father, Tom Riddle Senior, a love potion, never did anything of the sort? What if Tom Riddle Senior lied? Today we're going to be discussing all of that and more as we unpack Voldemort's origin story, uncovering some unknown truths about the early life of the most notorious dark wizard in history. Hey everyone, welcome to another installment of Harry Potter Theory. Tom Marvolo Riddle was born at Wool's Orphanage on New Year's Eve 1926 to Merrippy Gaunt, a pureblood witch that hailed from the House of Gaunt. The Gaunts have a long dark history, and known details of the family can be traced back as far as the 1600s. The family was at one time wealthy and prominent, a prosperous wizarding family that reaped the benefits of being around during the formation of the wizarding world as we know it. But over time the Gaunts became poorer, more inbred, and, well, a disaster in whichever way you looked at them. And by the time Merrippy came into existence, the Gaunt family were reduced to living in a little run-down shack just outside the town of Little Hangleton, engulfed in poverty and obscurity. Born in 1907, Merrippy endured quite a difficult upbringing in the town of Little Hangleton, sharing the family home with her father, Marvolo, and brother, Morfin. From the moment she was born, Merrippy faced a troubled existence, constantly berated and abused by her father and brother. However, in adulthood, Merrippy finally found herself alone for the first time. This was following an altercation between her brother, father, and the Ministry of Magic. Morfin was a mentally deranged wizard that liked to use magic on muggles. something that ultimately led to many conflicts between his family and the Ministry of Magic. Following one of these attacks, Bob Ogden from the Ministry's Magical Law Enforcement Squad visited the Gaunts, prompting violent resistance from the Gaunt men. During this altercation, Morphin revealed Merope's romantic interest in a muggle from their town, which prompted Marvolo to attack her. Ogden intervened, attempting to protect Merope, but this only caused Morphin to jump in and attack Ogden. The fiasco ultimately led to both Gaunt men being arrested and sent to Azkaban, with Marvolo being sent away for 6 months and Morphin for 3 years. Finding herself alone for the first time in her life, Merope was finally able to exercise her magical abilities which had always been suppressed through the torment of her brother and father. With this newfound freedom, it didn't take long for her magic to flourish. However, these newfound magical abilities eventually manifested in the form of a love potion, also known as Amortentia. Amortentia is the most powerful love potion in the world. It is distinctive for its mother-of-pearl sheen, and steam rises from the potion in spirals. Amortentia smells different to each person, according to what attracts them. Amortentia is considered by some to be the most dangerous potion in the Harry Potter universe, as it doesn't even induce actual love, just a semblance of love that is derived from strong obsession. This potion can truly make people do some very uncharacteristically strange things. And what did Merope do with this love potion? Why, use it on the wealthy, handsome muggle Tom Riddle Senior, of course. It's unknown how exactly Merope gave Riddle the love potion, as their lives weren't particularly intertwined, but we do know that he fell under its spell, quickly becoming infatuated with Merope. Fast forward just a few months later, and the two were married, with Merope pregnant with their child, Tom Marvolo Riddle, the same child that would later go on to become Lord Voldemort. But this love affair didn't last long, as a little less than a year after that, the effects of the spell no longer seemed to be influencing Tom. He began to fall out of love. It's unclear why this may have happened, but there are a few prevailing theories. The first is that Merope perpetuated her brainwashing of Tom via the Imperius Curse, and that she eventually stopped because she was curious as to whether he may have genuinely fallen in love with her. The second is that the effects of the love potion simply wore off. However, regardless of what may have happened, the day came where Tom was no longer bewitched, and it didn't take long for him to abandon his wife and son, promptly heading back to the town of Little Hangleton. After Tom fled, Merope succumbed to a profound depression and completely ceased practicing magic. And on New Year's Eve in 1926, she went to an orphanage and gave birth to her son, Tom Marvolo Riddle. Tom for the boy's father, and Marvolo for Merope's father. Tragically, Merope died shortly after Riddle was born, the result of a broken heart. Abandoned by the men she loved and suffering complications from childbirth, paired with starvation and/or hypothermia, Merope no longer had any desire to live, and made no attempts to utilize magic to save her own life. Merope refused to raise her wand, even to save her own life. She wouldn't even stay alive for her son. Dumbledore raised his eyebrows. "Could you possibly be feeling sorry for Lord Voldemort?" "No," said Harry quickly. "But she had a choice, didn't she? Not like my mother." "Your mother had a choice too," said Dumbledore gently. "Yes, Merope Riddle chose death in spite of a son who needed her, but do not judge her too harshly, Harry. She was greatly weakened by long suffering, and she never had your mother's courage." Merope's death meant that she was never there for Tom, and because of this he grew up without any concept or notion of love, something that many consider to be a lasting effect of the love potion that Merope had used on Tom's father, Tom Riddle Senior. At least, that's the story we've been told. But something important to note here is that this tale of Voldemort's origins comes from Dumbledore's mouth, and it's entirely possible that he got a few details wrong. What if Tom Riddle Senior was the true villain, and not Merope? I think that Dumbledore's assumption that Merope used a love potion to manipulate Tom Riddle Senior could have been incorrect. And I say this because Merope simply didn't have the skills or resources to produce something like a love potion. She was poor, inbred, magically stunted, and fundamentally lacked the resources, ingredients, skills, and knowledge to create something like a love potion, let alone produce it in the batches that would have been required to keep Tom in a perpetual state of infatuation. She never even went to Hogwarts, so why would we assume that she was proficient at potion making? After all, potion making is one of the most intricate forms of magic, the type of magic that would, presumably, require some sort of education. Snape says it himself, it's a subtle science and an exact art. And even if Merope somehow possessed knowledge on how to produce love potions, she had numerous other obstacles like her financial situation and her inability to procure the necessary ingredients for said potions. She lived in a run-down hovel on the outskirts of Little Hangleton, and she had no money. How can we expect her to source ingredients like ashwinder eggs, powdered moonstone, and pearl dust, just 3 of the 6 ingredients in a love potion? The idea that Merope could concoct a love potion substantial enough to bewitch Tom Riddle Senior for extended periods of time seems entirely implausible. Her meager resources, lack of magical prowess, and absence of valuable items for trade, all pointing to the improbable nature of this scenario. Okay, so she probably didn't create a love potion, but even if she had, how are we supposed to believe that Tom Riddle ingested it? All of the love potions we've seen in the books, including Amortentia, the most powerful love potion in existence, are easily smelled and seen by the mother-of-pearl sheen on their surface. It was Dumbledore that speculated that Merope offered Tom Senior a glass of water to drink. But if that was the case, clearly Riddle Senior would have noticed that what Merope was offering him wasn't just water. And if this was before they had any sort of relationship, why would Tom Riddle Senior, a handsome and wealthy muggle, accept an odd drink from the impoverished witch that lived in a run-down hut on the outskirts of town? But if Merope didn't give Tom Riddle Senior a love potion, what did happen? Here's what I think. The tall, dark and handsome Tom Riddle Senior lied about his interactions with Merope. Similar to how Voldemort would later become, he was a narcissist, and he made a habit out of using people for what he wanted. In Merope's case, he had no interest in her beyond getting her to bed. Tom may have openly mocked Merope for her poverty, but he wasn't a fool, and he must have, at some point, noticed Merope's interest in him from afar. She likes looking at that muggle, always in the garden when he passes, peering through the hedge at him, isn't she? And last night, hanging out of the window waiting for him to ride home, wasn't she? If Tom Senior possessed even a fraction of his son's intellect, craftiness, narcissism, manipulation abilities, and ruthlessness, coupled with his attractive appearance, it seems highly unlikely that he wouldn't have noticed Merope hanging out of the window as he rode by. And while Tom Riddle Senior was thought to be coupled up with a woman by the name of Cecilia, it's possible that he eventually became disinterested in her, instead shifting his attention towards Merope. You see, while his relationship with Cecilia may have been fine, I suspect that Merope's infatuation with Tom would have fueled his ego and eventually led him to her, no matter how much he may have looked down on her. And so one day, driven by a sense of morbid curiosity, Tom Riddle Senior rode his horse past the Gaunt Shack. Knowing that Merope's brother and father were away, he seized his opportunity and, well, you know the rest. From that point, Tom Senior embarked on a covert relationship with Merope, engaging in regular encounters with her while visiting the Gaunt Shack. He conveniently used his horseback riding as a cover for these rendezvous. However, much like his son, Tom Senior possessed traits of arrogance, vanity, and pride, leading to the belief that he never genuinely cared for or loved Merope. Instead, he exploited her infatuation, knowing she would be unable to refuse his advances. And it was only to maintain Merope's silence and loyalty that he reluctantly agreed to marry her. However, when she fell pregnant, he got much more than he bargained for, and when she revealed the pregnancy, Tom Senior callously abandoned Merope and their unborn child. Any respectable person would have risen to the occasion, but Tom Riddle Senior, concerned for his reputation and ashamed of his actions, decided instead to point a finger at Merope, claiming that she had bewitched him. His fabricated story, in conjunction with Merope's family's reputation as social pariahs, demonstrated a deliberate attempt to shirk responsibility and escape accountability for his actions. And so the tall, dark and handsome Tom Riddle Senior that lived a life of luxury was not an innocent victim in his entanglement with Merope. He was just a deadbeat dad. Within a few months of their runaway marriage, Tom Riddle reappeared at the manor house in Little Hangleton without his wife. The rumor flew around the neighborhood that he was talking of being hoodwinked and taken in. He left her, never saw her again, and never troubled to discover what became of his son. For so long, Merope has been portrayed as the villain in this story, but if we look at the facts, it actually makes a lot more sense that Tom Riddle Senior would have been the manipulative one. He had everything going for him, including superior intelligence, and Merope had nothing. To suggest that an inbred, impoverished, uneducated witch was able to take advantage of him in the way the story has always been portrayed seems so unlikely. And if we are to believe that, like his son, Tom Senior too was a narcissist, his behavior exactly fits the profile of one, and shows that he might have been just as cold-blooded as his son. I think that for so long we've given Dumbledore's version of events too much credence, where in reality, Dumbledore did not know as much about Voldemort's backstory as he let on. It's as though everyone, Dumbledore included, was tricked by Tom Senior's story, believing him to be the victim and Merope to be the perpetrator. And because Tom Riddle Senior was a wealthy, intelligent muggle, no one ever even questioned his version of events. After all, why would anyone have ever believed a poor, uneducated social pariah such as Merope? And I think that perhaps Tom Riddle Jr. somehow knew the truth. While he did grow up to be much like his father in so many ways, he must have known deep down, somehow, what his father had done. A truth which only further fueled his hatred for muggles. And so when he became the appropriate age, Voldemort sought his father out and enacted his revenge, finally giving his father what he deserved. You think I was going to use my filthy muggle father's name forever? I, in whose veins runs the blood of Salazar Slytherin himself through my mother's side? I keep the name of a foul, common muggle who abandoned me even before I was born, just because he found out his wife was a witch? No, Harry, I fashioned myself a new name, a name I knew wizards everywhere would one day fear to speak, when I had become the greatest sorcerer in the world.
There are quite a few mistakes and plot holes in the Harry Potter books and films. In fact, there are enough for me to make several compilations of them. However, perhaps one of the most confusing and inconsistent elements of the wizarding world is undoubtedly the trace, a fairly major plot component that is riddled with contradictions. To the Harry Potter casual, these issues with the trace probably went by relatively unnoticed, but for the diehards, it was hard to ignore the glaringly obvious ways in which the trace was misrepresented. There are also many components of the trace that are never explained, like how it is actually applied to underage witches and wizards. Today we'll be diving deep into the trace, exploring what it is, how it's applied to children, and through examples from the books and films, uncovering why this concept is essentially a total train wreck. We'll also be looking at the trace from a more sinister perspective via one of my theories. Let's dive in. Hey everyone, welcome to another installment of Harry Potter Theory. Before we continue, I want to mention that only 24.5% of you are subscribed, so if you enjoy the content, please consider subscribing to support the channel. To kick things off, let's address the basics. What is it? We first hear about the trace early in the story, presented as a vague but seemingly simple rule prohibiting the use of magic outside of school by underage witches and wizards. The trace is applied to any and all witches and wizards under the age of 17, and at first glance appears to be a straightforward policy designed to prevent young witches and wizards from using magic unsupervised, especially in the Muggle world where it could lead to exposure of the magical community. Countless times, Harry had been on the point of unlocking Hedwig's cage by magic and sending her to Ron and Hermione with a letter, but it wasn't worth the risk. Underage wizards weren't allowed to use magic outside of school. Harry hadn't told the Dursleys this. He knew it was only their terror that he might turn them all into dung beetles that stopped them from locking him in the cupboard under the stairs with his wand and broomstick. And I suppose in some ways, fair enough. I know I'd find it hard to trust a bunch of unsupervised 11 and 12-year-olds equipped with their first wand and spellbook, especially in a Muggle community. However, it isn't until Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets that we learn the trace is actually a sophisticated magical monitoring system overseen by a dedicated Ministry of Magic division called the Improper Use of Magic Office. Its official purpose is to ensure that underage witches and wizards abide the law by prohibiting magical activity outside of Hogwarts, primarily in a bid to uphold the International Statute of Secrecy. How does it work? From the moment an underage witch or wizard decides to cast a spell outside of where they're supposed to, the trace comes into effect, notifying the Ministry of Magic of magical activity in the vicinity. It can identify what, where, and when magic was cast. That is, the Ministry can tell what spell was used, the location, due to the trace being somehow bound to the young person, and the exact time it was cast. However, what's important to note here is that the trace cannot differentiate between magic performed by the underage witch or wizard themselves and magic performed by another wizard in the same area. This is why instances of magic, like Dobby's hover charm in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, result in immediate action from the Ministry, as shown by the letter Harry received during the holiday. Dear Mr. Potter, we have received intelligence that a hover charm was used at your place of residence this evening at 12 minutes past 9. In this same letter, we also find out that the Ministry lets first offenders off with a warning, as in Harry wrongfully taking the fall for Dobby, and reserves the power to expel repeat offenders from school. However, this exposes a significant gap in the Ministry's ability to enforce the trace fairly. The fact that Harry is held accountable for Dobby's magic, despite not actually performing it, highlights a serious fault in the system. There's also the issue of the Ministry's blatant disregard for investigating the details behind the magic, acting only on the trace of magical activity itself. As you know, underage wizards are not permitted to perform spells outside school, and further spell work on your part may lead to expulsion from said school. Decree for the Reasonable Restriction of Underage Sorcery, 1875, paragraph C. It would also appear that the maximum penalty for continuing to break this law is expulsion from Hogwarts. Personally, I find it odd that there are no other punishments involved. Why it's broken. Like I may have mentioned once or twice already, the trace system is far from perfect, the largest issue being that the trace cannot differentiate between magic performed by the underage witch or wizard themselves and magic performed by another wizard in the same area. This flaw creates significant inconsistencies in how the trace is enforced, especially when young witches and wizards live in magical households where adult wizards and witches are constantly using magic of their own. For example, if someone with a trace on them were to use a spell at their house, wouldn't the improper use of Magic Office just assume that it was a parent casting magic? For if they didn't, there would be a lot of alerts they would need to unnecessarily respond to each and every time a senior member of a child's house performed magic. Of course, doing so would be completely unsustainable, not to mention rather impossible. The same could be said for basically everywhere outside of school within the wizarding world as well, from shopping in Diagon Alley to attending Quidditch matches. With so many witches and wizards, how would Ministry officials be able to identify if any of the magic they detected through the trace was from an underage witch or wizard, or someone of the age of majority who was simply standing near an underage witch or wizard? And this brings me to another issue. Muggleborns. Given that the trace only picks up magic in the vicinity, and not necessarily from the witch or wizard themselves, the argument could be made that it is fundamentally biased against Muggleborn witches and wizards. Because wizards like Harry live in non-magical households, every single trace of magic in their vicinity is automatically attributed to them, and because there are no other magical individuals nearby to potentially be responsible for casting spells, any and all magical activity is assumed to be theirs. Children from magical families, on the other hand, would have a much easier time evading detection because the Ministry cannot distinguish their magic from that of their parents, siblings, or other magical relatives. For example, Fred and George Weasley openly admit to experimenting with magic at the Burrow long before they turn 17, and yet there's no mention of them ever getting into trouble for it. Muggleborns, or those raised in Muggle communities, are basically held to a much stricter standard, while children in magical homes can cast away without fear of reprisal. Based on this information, it could be argued that the system is inherently biased against Muggleborns, and the fact that they are disproportionately targeted by the trace system speaks volumes about the Ministry's underlying attitudes towards non-magical heritage. It could even suggest a systemic belief that Muggleborns are inherently more suspicious, dangerous, or perhaps even less worthy of fair treatment than purebloods or even half-bloods. In this way, the trace is more than just a flawed magical monitoring system. It's a tool that reinforces the Ministry's long-standing prejudices and discrimination against Muggleborns. But I'm just getting started. Now for the next problem. Lack of specificity. Later in the series, there are indications that the Ministry has no way of knowing which specific individual's trace has been activated when magic is performed in the vicinity of an underage witch or wizard. A prime example of this is the elaborate operation the Order of the Phoenix undertakes to move Harry safely from Privet Drive at the start of Deathly Hallows. The Order goes to great lengths to avoid using magic near Harry, fearing that his trace might alert the Ministry to its location. Using brooms, thestrals, and even decoys instead of apparition, portkeys, or other means of magical transportation, all to avoid detection. However, all of this feels entirely unnecessary when we consider what happens next, as after arriving at the Burrow, Harry spends several days surrounded by adult witches and wizards, all of whom are casting magic freely without any apparent concern for setting off his trace. This makes all of their prior efforts seem a bit redundant. Had they truly wanted to protect Harry, all of the Weasleys should have given up magic until Harry became of age. And there are plenty of other examples of the trace simply not working. During the graveyard duel in the Goblet of Fire, Harry uses magic to defend himself against Voldemort. However, despite being underage and surrounded by Death Eaters, no indication of the trace triggering is mentioned. When Tom Riddle was still an underage wizard, he killed his father, paternal grandfather, and grandmother outside of school, but was never held responsible. When Harry asks Dumbledore about it, he explains, "The Ministry had no way of knowing who performed the magic, just like with you and Dobby." However, Morphin Gaunt, the person who Riddle framed, was not underage, and this alone should have ruled him out as the culprit. Furthermore, Riddle's spell to implant a false memory in Morphin should have triggered the trace and raised suspicion by itself. Complicating things even further, there are some moments in the films, not books, where the trace should have activated but doesn't. One example that springs to mind is during Prisoner of Azkaban, when Harry uses Lumos at the Dursley residence. How is the trace applied? Some way, somehow, one simple question remains unanswered throughout the entire Harry Potter series, and that is how the trace applied to underage wizards in the first place. If you're an inquisitive Harry Potter fan like myself, you'll probably have a number of questions. Like, how is the trace actually bound to a young witch or wizard? And who, if it's done by a person, is responsible for using the spell on underage magical children? As far as we know, the Ministry doesn't send officials to each and every place of residence within Wizarding Society to bind the trace to young witches and wizards. Nor is there any mention of someone from the Ministry visiting magical schools like Hogwarts to do a mass incantation of the spell. It's possible that parents could perform the trace upon having a child, kind of like how Muggles registered their newborns with governments, but this doesn't account for Muggle-born children whose parents wouldn't have any idea how to do this. Some fans have suggested that perhaps students get the trace upon boarding the Hogwarts Express for the first time. But what about children who don't go to school like Merope Gaunt? This also adds another layer of confusion, as it's not entirely clear whether or not the trace applies to all children or just children that attend Hogwarts. Another theory suggests that the trace might only apply to Hogwarts students during official school breaks. If true, this could explain why the magic performed around Harry in the Little Hangleton Cemetery during Goblet of Fire wasn't flagged, since it occurred during the school year when the trace might not be active. Given that the ultimate punishment for acting in defiance of the trace is expulsion from school, you would think that it would only apply to Hogwarts attendees, but somehow this just doesn't sit right with me. I genuinely believe that all children have the trace, and I think it's enforced via the very same tools that alert Hogwarts to the existence of magical children in the first place: the Book of Admittance and Quill of Acceptance. In a small locked tower, never visited by any student at Hogwarts, sits an ancient book that has not been touched by human hands since the four founders placed it there on completion of the castle. Beside the book, which is bound in peeling black dragonhide, stands a small silver ink pot, and from this protrudes a long, faded quill. These are the Quill of Acceptance and the Book of Admittance, and they constitute the only process by which students are selected for Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. The book and quill were put in place by the founders of Hogwarts to aid with and automate the Hogwarts selection process. They knew that for centuries they would need students to be selected for the school, and there's no way that they would be able to manage it manually. One of the main parameters put in place for detecting students is as follows. At the precise moment that a child first exhibits signs of magic, The quill, which is believed to have been taken from an augury, floats up out of its inkpot and attempts to inscribe the name of that child upon the pages of the book. This means that as soon as a child shows any form of magic, it is immediately set in writing that they are a magical being. No child would be able to perform magic undetected without this magical book and quill taking note of it. And I think that this is what the Ministry uses to give underage wizards the trace. Because no wizarding child is able to avoid detection from these magical artifacts, it would ensure that all magical children are given the trace. And perhaps it's the same form of ancient magic that not only detects these newly born magical children, but also applies the trace to them. Why the trace? By now it's clear that the trace is both ubiquitous, yet oddly unreliable, which raises an important question. Why? Why does the Ministry of Magic persist with such an inconsistent system? All it seems to accomplish is unfairly penalizing underage witches and wizards for magic they didn't even perform. More importantly, why enforce a system designed to monitor and punish underage magic when it cannot reliably determine whether the child in question actually cast the spell? The Ministry of Magic's claim is that the trace was implemented to both help maintain the statute of secrecy, as well as to avoid any exposure of the magical world. And in theory, this makes sense, as I understand that it's a tall order to expect children to sufficiently maintain the delicate balance of secrecy required to keep the wizarding world hidden from muggles. Young witches and wizards still learning to control their magic are bound to make mistakes, and a system like the trace could theoretically provide a safety net, alerting authorities to unauthorized magical activity before it spirals out of control. However, in my opinion, its flaws overshadow its function, and it's hard to imagine this system achieving the level of oversight the Ministry claims it provides. Instead, it often feels more like a tool of control than an effective safeguard. Which brings me to my next theory. It's used to control and spy on people. By applying the trace universally to all underage wizards and witches, the Ministry gains an unprecedented level of access to magical households. While the trace may not be specifically designed to track spells cast within wizarding households, this doesn't mean that magical activity in these homes goes unrecorded. And as Dumbledore explains in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, the Ministry faces the same limitation in wizarding homes as in Muggle ones. They can detect that magic has been performed, but cannot identify who actually cast the spell. And while they can't pinpoint who cast them, it still effectively gives them a catalogue of the spells cast in the household of pretty much anyone with kids. If you think about it for a second, this measure is incredibly invasive, and quite frankly I'm shocked that it hasn't sparked outrage. Masked under the guise of protecting their children and the statute of secrecy, the Ministry is secretly obtaining and recording more and more information on the lives of its citizens. By monitoring general magical activity in the proximity of these children, they are effectively creating a surveillance system that extends beyond children, providing the Ministry with a constant flow of information about the lives of magical families. While ostensibly aimed at minors, the system could easily be exploited to gather intelligence on adults, effectively giving the Ministry a tool to keep tabs on its citizens. Historically, the Ministry has been morally dubious to say the least, and I think this theory would align with the Ministry's history of authoritarian practices. I suspect that in reality the trace could represent a calculated means of exerting influence over the wizarding population under the guise of protecting the magical world. Armed with this weapon, the Ministry has the means to use false accusations or selective enforcement of the trace as a pretext to interrogate, punish, or keep families under close scrutiny. And if you need an example of this, look no further than the Order of the Phoenix. Harry's trial for the use of a Patronus charm is a perfect example of how the Ministry used the trace to publicly discredit him, despite the spell being necessary for his survival. This suggests the trace is not merely a neutral enforcement tool, but one that can be politically weaponized. What's less clear is whether the trace's original purpose has been corrupted over time. Perhaps it was initially created as a genuine safeguard, but was later repurposed with more sinister intentions. In short, the trace grants excessive authority to a government agency that claims to uphold the statute of secrecy while secretly harboring ulterior motives. Beyond unfairly penalizing students in Muggle households, penalties their peers in wizarding homes would never face, The trace seems designed to enable the Ministry to infringe on fundamental rights to privacy. Final gripes. Given that the Ministry of Magic clearly has the capability of tracking the activities of witches and wizards, I wonder why they don't implement the same sort of system on, I don't know, criminals. It's highly unusual that the Ministry dedicates so much effort to monitoring underage children who might accidentally cast spells outside of school, while many former criminals roam freely in the wizarding world without any similar magical oversight. It should be standard practice for any and all prisoners of Azkaban to be marked with a trace upon admittance to the prison. After all, tracking the magical activity of prisoners could provide an early warning system if they attempt to escape or engage in any illicit activity. All of those Azkaban escapees wouldn't have been so much of a problem if they simply had some sort of trace applied to them. The Harry Potter prophecy is a major driving force of the Harry Potter story. Foretold by seer Sybil Trelawney, the fabled prophecy foresaw the birth of the person who would have the power to defeat Lord Voldemort. And to begin to unpack today's topic further, we need to take a look at the prophecy a little closer. In 1980, Sybil Trelawney, the now Hogwarts divination professor, was interviewing for her posting at Hogwarts. During her interview, a disappointed and unimpressed Dumbledore began to lose interest, when suddenly Sybil entered a trance. In her trance, Sybil spoke of a boy that would be born at the end of July, that possessed the power to defeat the Dark Lord himself. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches, born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month dies. And the Dark Lord will mark him as his equal, but he will have power the Dark Lord knows not, and either must die at the hand of the other, for neither can live while the other survives. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord will be born as the 7th month dies. And it was this very prophecy that put the Potter family, James, Lily, and Harry, into hiding, because their son Harry fit all of the criteria, born as the 7th month dies. Had no one heard Sybil's prophecy, then there likely wouldn't have been any need to go into hiding. But unfortunately for the Potters, Snape, who was then a Death Eater, was eavesdropping at the door, and it didn't take long for him to relay this new information to Voldemort. From Snape's perspective, this was his first mistake, but it was also perhaps the catalyst for unforgivable, opportunistic actions on Snape's part that will potentially forever change the way you look at his character. And so Voldemort, who would unquestionably hunt for the boy that was prophesied to vanquish him, began plotting. Aware of the imminent danger, the Potter family put in place all sorts of preventative measures to ensure that they wouldn't be found, most importantly the Fidelius Charm, an immensely complex spell involving the magical concealment of a secret inside a single living soul. The information is hidden inside the chosen person or secret keeper and is henceforth impossible to find, unless, of course, the secret keeper chooses to divulge it. The secret keeper that was eventually chosen was Peter Pettigrew, aka Wormtail, and this was mainly because everyone felt that the likely choice, Sirius Black, would have been targeted. However, we know that Peter Pettigrew later reveals his true colours, and in one infamous act of cowardice and disloyalty, reveals the location of the Potter cottage to Voldemort, not even a week after he was made secret keeper. And it was this very act that resulted in the murder of both Lily and James. But why, you might now be asking, would Snape voluntarily relay the prophecy to Voldemort, knowing it would risk the life of Lily Evans, the person he cared about the most and the only girl he ever loved? Well, Snape didn't exactly think it through. You see, Snape only heard the first part of the prophecy and didn't really interpret it in any way. He only overheard some of the conditions of the prophecy, and probably didn't check to see who met those conditions, or did not have enough of them to narrow things down to Harry and Neville. At the time, the prophecy was made in early 1980. Snape had no knowledge that it could have been about Lily's child. Harry and Neville had not yet been born, and Snape had no contact with Lily, so he wouldn't have even been aware of her pregnancy. And when Snape finally did become aware that the prophecy referred to Lily, he went into meltdown, desperately arranging for a meeting with Dumbledore atop a windy hilltop. The encounter is observed by Harry through the pensive.
At this point, Snape subscribed to the inhuman philosophies of Lord Voldemort. He was a killer, traitor, liar, and betrayer of all those who had trusted him. The longer Harry watches, the better he's able to piece together Snape's position. Overcome with guilt and knowing that Voldemort's knowledge of this prophecy directly put Lily's life in jeopardy, Snape had no other choice than to go to Dumbledore, the only wizard powerful enough to directly oppose Lord Voldemort and protect Lily. Of course, Snape never knew that Dumbledore would fail in protecting the woman he loved, but in that moment he became vulnerable and confided in the wise old wizard. But for just a moment, don't let Snape's devotion to Lily distract you from his hatred for James. We're led to believe that the Snape who met Dumbledore atop the hilltop was a changed man. A man who had realized the error in his ways and was acting in an altruistic fashion. But I'm here to tell you that's not the case, and that Snape, at least in that moment in time, hadn't changed at all. Yes, Snape wanted to save Lily, but he also wanted something else, and what came across as selflessness was actually largely opportunism. At this stage, Snape had been an active Death Eater for several years. He had witnessed and committed atrocities firsthand. How am I supposed to believe that, in one instant, his very core shifted? Yes, he cared for Lily, but no one else, and Snape actively hated James. I think that Snape used this opportunity to have James Potter killed. The prophecy, the prediction, Trelawney. Ah, yes. How much did you relay to Lord Voldemort? Everything. Everything I heard. That is why. It is for that reason. He thinks it means Lily Evans. The prophecy did not refer to a woman. It spoke of a boy born at the end of July. You know what I mean. He thinks it means her son. He's going to hunt her down. Kill them all. If she means so much to you, surely Lord Voldemort will spare her. Could you not ask for mercy for the mother in exchange for the son? I have asked him. You disgust me, said Dumbledore, and Harry had never heard so much contempt in his voice. Snape seemed to shrink a little. You do not care, then, about the deaths of her husband and child? They can die as long as you have what you want? Hide them all, then, he croaked. Keep them, safe. Please. In this passage, Snape shows genuine concern for Lily Evans' life, but he also shows very little regard for the lives of Harry and James. It's also clear from the above passage that Snape spoke with Voldemort first, and that the only reason Snape turned to Dumbledore was because he wasn't confident that Voldemort would in fact spare Lily's life. We aren't actually given the conversation that Snape had with Voldemort, but I'd be willing to bet that he completely threw James under the bus, offering up his life on a silver platter. And I don't think that Snape is guilty of just not asking Voldemort to save James. I think he asked him to kill him. Dumbledore had seen and done a lot of horrible things over the course of his life. Along with Grindelwald, he had schemed to pursue the Deathly Hallows with intention to enslave Muggles and put wizards in power. He had also indirectly contributed to the death of his own sister, and so for Dumbledore to be disgusted to the extent that the text describes, it must have been abundantly clear to Dumbledore that Snape wanted James dead for his own creepy, obsessive intentions. He must have read between the lines and saw that James dying was a desired byproduct for Snape. Snape protected Harry later in life because his very existence contained a loose thread of Lily's, but James meant nothing. And what was Snape's motive here? Why, unhealthy obsession, of course. My point is this: besides his concern for Lily's life, Snape saw a silver lining to the prophecy. It was a way to get rid of James, his childhood bully, once and for all, and it was an opportunity to have the most powerful dark wizard in the world do it for him. But this does also bring me back to when Snape first relayed the prophecy to Voldemort. Conventional understanding would suggest that Snape simply hadn't read between the lines when hearing the prophecy, and thus never made any connection to Lily, freely providing the information to Voldemort. But are we truly supposed to believe that Snape was so naive? Snape had one of the most brilliant minds in the entire wizarding world, and for him to hear about the prophecy, not even begin to use any sort of powers of deduction, seems highly unlikely. I think that Snape knew all too well who the prophecy was referring to, and saw this as an opportunity to distance Lily from the family that she had established for herself. In adolescence, it was always him or James, and with no James around, he thought that he could fall right back into Lily's life.
His only mistake, trusting that Voldemort would honor his wishes in protecting Lily.
Did you know, sir, then? Did I know that I had just met the most dangerous dark wizard of all time? No. These were the words exchanged by Harry Potter and Albus Dumbledore after taking a glance into the pensive and observing Dumbledore's first encounter with a young Tom Riddle. And it's these words that clarify why Dumbledore saved Tom, invited him to Hogwarts, and gave him a magical education. Because you see, Dumbledore, despite a few signs here and there, could never have known that this young troubled boy would go on to cause so much death and destruction. I mean, how could he? But the exchange does make me wonder, what would have happened if Dumbledore had known what young Tom Riddle's true capabilities were? What if he knew just how many lives he'd claim, and how much destruction he'd cause? Would things have been different? Would he have attended Hogwarts? Just how different would the magical world have been had Dumbledore obtained that singular, albeit massive, piece of information? Today we're going to be answering all of that and more as we discuss a scenario in which Dumbledore was aware of Voldemort's true capabilities. Hey everyone, welcome to another installment of Harry Potter Theory. The first encounter between Albus Dumbledore and Tom Riddle was in 1938, when Dumbledore visits Wall's orphanage to offer Tom a place at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. During their meeting, Dumbledore informs Tom about the existence of the wizarding world and his magical heritage. And Tom, who had already sensed his own powers, is intrigued by the prospect of attending Hogwarts. At the time, Tom was an 11-year-old orphan who had exhibited signs of magical abilities, but he was also known for his manipulative and cruel behavior towards the other children at the orphanage. On the outside, Tom looked fairly innocuous, but underneath was a brooding dark force that would stop at nothing to cause pain and suffering to others. This encounter between Dumbledore and Tom Riddle is significant because it marks the beginning of their complex relationship throughout the series. It also highlights Dumbledore's role in the early life of one of the most dangerous dark wizards in history. Right from the very beginning, from their very first encounter, Dumbledore was cautious and wary of the young boy, sensing Tom's dark nature and potential for evil. Despite all of the warning signs, however, Dumbledore proceeds to offer Tom a place at Hogwarts, hoping that the new school and new environment would help shift Tom's life in a more positive direction. All of this is shown to Harry via the pensive, the purpose of which was to give Harry a sense of context for the task that he would later give him, and the memories that he would later show him. He wanted to give Harry an idea of the troubled young boy that Lord Voldemort once was, show him that Tom Riddle was once a student much like him, and show him how his path of darkness began. But my question is, how did Dumbledore, we are led to believe is particularly intelligent and strategic, suffer such a massive oversight in assessing Tom Riddle's nature? Why didn't Dumbledore, one of the most powerful wizards of all time, simply strike young Tom Riddle down right there and then, saving countless lives in the process? The conversations that the pair shared held more than enough clues that Tom was indeed a bad apple. What is it that you can do? All sorts, breathed Riddle. A flush of excitement was rising up his neck into his hollow cheeks. He looked fevered. I can make things move without touching them. I can make animals do what I want them to do, without training them. I can make bad things happen to people who annoy me. I can make them hurt if I want to. His legs were trembling. He stumbled forward and sat down on the bed again, staring at his hands. His head bowed as though in prayer. I knew I was different, he whispered to his own quivering fingers. I knew I was special, always. I knew there was something. Well, you were quite right, said Dumbledore, who was no longer smiling, but watching Riddle intently. You are a wizard. Riddle lifted his head. His face was transfigured. There was a wild happiness upon it, yet for some reason, it did not make him better looking. On the contrary, his finely carved features seemed somehow rougher, his expression almost bestial. But while there were many clues which may have suggested Riddle's darker nature, we have to remember that Dumbledore was a man who believed in second chances. After all, Dumbledore himself had made many regrettable decisions in his youth, and so he may have seen this as an opportunity to steer this young boy away from making the same sorts of mistakes that he did. We also have to remember that Dumbledore did not possess the ability to foresee the future. He had his suspicions about Tom, but that's all they were, suspicions. And for him to kill this young boy over these suspicions would have been ludicrous. Was it a bit of an oversight? Perhaps. But the alternative scenario, where Dumbledore kills a troubled orphan, doesn't exactly paint Dumbledore in a particularly good light. But for today, let's explore the alternative. Dumbledore kills him. Acting on his suspicions and using the magical art of legilimency, Dumbledore peels back the layers of Tom Riddle's mind and discovers what he's truly capable of. In a moment of clarity and foresight, he learns of the dark path that lies ahead for Tom, and he begins to understand the immense danger that Riddle's manipulative and power-hungry nature poses to the wizarding world. Faced with this knowledge, Dumbledore contemplates a drastic action that could potentially alter the course of history. Despite grappling with the moral dilemma of taking a life, Dumbledore believes that the potential harm inflicted by Riddle's actions warrants some form of intervention, and upon realizing that removing Riddle from the equation could prevent countless deaths, Dumbledore toys with the idea of ending this young orphan's life. After setting foot through the front doors of Wol's orphanage, Dumbledore confronts Tom, fully aware of the ancient darkness that lurks within him, and Dumbledore wastes no time, immediately raising his wand and only pausing for a second before firing off a killing curse at the young boy. And the ripple effect that this decision would make would be monumental in altering the course of wizarding history. By eliminating Tom Riddle at a young age, Dumbledore would have halted the rise of Voldemort as the dark wizard we now know, and without Voldemort's presence, the wizarding world would have been spared from his reign of terror, which caused immense suffering and loss of life. He never would have made Horcruxes. The prophecy wouldn't have existed. Harry Potter's life would have been completely different, and many of the beloved characters throughout the series that lost their lives to Voldemort and his Death Eaters would still be alive and kicking. The absence of Voldemort would have rewritten wizarding history. But the impact on Dumbledore would have been significant, and I suspect that he would have never been able to properly explain his actions to the rest of the wizarding world, his decision forever changing his own character and legacy. Dumbledore would have committed a serious crime by taking the life of a young child, even though it was driven by his knowledge of Riddle's future as Voldemort. As such, he would have been subject to the law and likely faced imprisonment or trial for murder. His actions would have also tarnished his reputation as one of the greatest and most respected wizards of his time. The knowledge that he killed a child, regardless of the justifications, would have shattered the public's trust in him, as he would have been seen as someone who takes the law into his own hands. And depending on the outcome of any legal proceedings, Dumbledore could have been sentenced to life in Azkaban. And I think that from the moment he killed Tom, Dumbledore would have accepted his fate. He knew that he'd never be able to explain why he did what he did, so he didn't try. But he also knew that sacrificing himself for all of those future lives was for the greater good, a philosophy he still hadn't quite shaken off. However, by choosing to act on his impulses and kill Tom Riddle, Dumbledore would have unknowingly and inadvertently paved the way for another dark wizard to rise to power, Grindelwald. You see, Dumbledore's visit to Tom Riddle in Wol's orphanage occurred in 1938, and the significance of this date is that it's prior to Dumbledore's legendary defeat of the dark wizard Gellert Grindelwald in 1945. And while Dumbledore's act may have saved countless lives taken by Voldemort, his imprisonment in Azkaban for his crimes would have given Grindelwald the opportunity to take over. Because you see, like Voldemort, the only wizard that Grindelwald feared was Dumbledore. By killing Tom Riddle as an orphan, the wizarding world would have only succumbed to darkness much sooner, and perhaps in a more concrete manner. From as early as 1938, Grindelwald could have laid his plans in motion and effectively taken over the wizarding world. And with Dumbledore in prison, no one could have stopped him. And even if the Ministry knew that Dumbledore was capable of defeating Grindelwald, why on earth would they make the decision to release an unpredictable child killer? For all they knew, it could have just added more fuel to the fire. On a lighter note, one other alternate scenario is that Dumbledore, recognizing Tom's latent potential for evil, placed him in an environment where he was showered with love. He found him a magical foster family. Many fans of the series believe that Tom Riddle, because of his conception under a love potion, was fundamentally incapable of love, but that's actually a common misconception. In an interview, J.K. Rowling once revealed that if Merope had survived and been there to give her son love, he still could have had a chance at developing a normal range of emotions. It was a symbolic way of showing that he came from a loveless union. But of course, everything would have changed if Merope had survived and raised him herself and loved him. Therefore, had Dumbledore found an appropriate family to look after Riddle during his adolescence, it's entirely possible that he could have turned out alright. He still would have gone to Hogwarts, but he no longer would have been alone. He would have always had a place to call home, and he'd have a family to spend the holidays with. Could he have still turned out evil? Could the damage have already been done during his years at the orphanage? Absolutely. But I like to think that this could have made a difference.
And that's it for this video. Which theories do you agree with? Let me know down in the comment section below. Until next time, remember, it does not do to dwell on dreams and forget to live.